guys. I'm so sorry. Got delayed, but
Good evening, sir.
good evening. Hi. Better late than never, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're right on time.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Sir, so now we'll be going live. Thank you so much. Good evening, one and all. I'm Sanvi Singhal. On behalf of the Entrepreneurship Development Cell in IT Durgapur, I welcome you all to our very first panel discussion in eSummit 2022, Leaders Symposium. It is a discussion to assemble organic ideas, thoughts, and layers of notions and reasoning. With the interchanging dynamics of entrepreneurship and the wave of the same that is sweeping across the nation, the Leaders Symposium is sure to become a bedrock for discussions. I would like to start by introducing our very esteemed panelists. We are delighted to have with us Mr. Rahul Nainani, a social entrepreneur with a finance background and a keen interest in policy and circular economy. Sir is currently the co-founder and CEO of Recircle. We take great pleasure in welcoming our second panelist, Mr. Shravan Tickoo, a product manager by profession and a growth enthusiast at heart. Sir is the principal product manager at Byju's. Our third panelist for the discussion is Mr. Mikhil Innani, the managing director and CEO at Apollo Finvest, a public listed NBFC. Sir has 10 plus years experience of building products from scratch to a scale of 250 plus million monthly active users. Next, we are elated to have with us Ms. Pallavi Barman, an experienced founder with a demonstrated history of working in the marketing and advertising industry. Ma'am is presently the head of marketing at Hrx. Last but not the least, we are ecstatic to have with us Mr. Ravi Ranjan, who is an entrepreneurship evangelist, startup expert, government advisor, 2-time TEDx speaker, and public speaker. Sir is the co-founder of Velocity One. So without further ado, let's commence with the session. We will be starting with what is the most fundamental principle that someone entrusted with a position of power such as yours have to keep in mind with respect to expansion and promotion that is relevant across all major sectors. With this question, we would like to begin with the panel discussion.
Sanvi, are you directing this at somebody? How would you like to begin?
Ma'am, this is a general question just to get into the flow of the panel discussion. So anybody can answer.
Sanvi, I think you can remove your earphone because you're quite not audible. Just remove it from the laptop. Trust me, without the earphone is the best one. Yeah. Pallavi, why don't you take this one if you're okay with that? Yeah.
So Sanvi, this is a huge responsibility when it comes to planning an organization, and I think this is a quintessential part of leadership. Let's start with the leadership conversation here because you brought out a very relevant topic, and it's so wide in scope that I will probably try bucketing this into components of sort of two ingredients that think about when you're planning, when you're talking about expansion, when you're talking about growth across various sectors. I think the first most important thing that we need to look inwardly upon is people. It's the most basic tool of any business. Commerce thrives only when you're kind of falling back on the right set of people. So the fundamental and the most for me to have is to have the right set of people with an arsenal who can go out and shoot in whichever direction you want them to. And second is creating a very strong foundation, which the founders sort of lay down brick by brick and create a very safe and a very comfortable working environment where the workforce that you have nurtured, that you have groomed, that you are kind of training to become future leaders are very attuned to working in an environment which kind of empowers them. So I think since it's so wide in scope, this entire topic, I would start off with these two very important pillars, and I can ask Shravan and Rahul and Mikhil and everybody to comment on this.
Yeah, I'll just quickly go next. I think I'll try to answer it from a very product management cliched perspective, but what I'll put it across is I think growth is a very strong function of what kind of service or product or anything, a kind of hypothesis that you'd want to bring into the market, which actually improves the lives of your end users in some way, maybe improves the happiness quotient, does something on those lines. I think building that right hypothesis initially is very, very relevant so that you can test who are you building for, why are you building it across, and then on top of that, if you see that your end customer whoever is the end user, maybe it's a B2B brand, maybe it's a B2C kind of a thing, how do they effectively quantify that impact? And they're feeling very happy about it. I think once you kind of have figured that out, then second thing, I think what Pallavi mentioned is really, really important. Like, do you bring the right kind of people who are equally passionate about building that particular thing, right? Be it an educational service, a healthcare service, anything that you're building across, do you have the right set of people who are just focused on the fact that this is going to build something that is truly amazing, which is going to be long lasting, and they're definitely more and more passionate about it. And then you try to, as a founder, probably build that paradigm of autonomy and accountability. I have seen that in positions where you give great autonomy to people who have the right attitude besides the skills, they end up doing extremely well. And also you try to build a system of accountability, that how do you measure their performance? How do you effectively test that they're going on the right way? But I think the larger picture of building these two things, building a great product and building distribution, is that you try to understand and build a very strong emotional connect with your audience, right? Like, about Hrx is a brand which has a deep emotional connect with the audience, with the fitness community. I think from an educational perspective, you would see very similar kind of ripple effects in brands like Coursera, Khan Academy. They have very deep emotional distribution. And one of the things that people generally don't notice while they scale a great culture or expand a venture, it's not just about building a massive following. It's about that people should feel that they're included in that process. And that can only happen when it starts from the company, building the right people, consistently testing that hypothesis, consistently innovating, always trying to empathize, building very strong feedback loops, and then eventually scaling it very responsibly. I think these are the two areas that I would say, that one is testing the right hypothesis, and second, building a very strong emotional distribution, and that starts with people, for sure. Yeah.
Speaking, I just realized that I took a step back, and before we get started on anything, I think the most important thing is to have a vision.
Yeah.
It all starts with a dream, right? And you need to have a very firm and a very strong belief in your own dream and in your own vision, because when you start going out to the market, when you start going around talking to people, or even when you're trying to sell to your first set of customers, nobody ever comes and says to you that, wow, what a cracker of an idea, right? It only happens when you have that conviction and you keep sort of hammering again and again, that people start buying into your dream. They start becoming a part of your vision and your journey. Yeah. So I think before you get started onto anything, the first most important template gets derived out of your dream or your big vision and how you want to sort of nail it in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think I agree with Pallavi. I think people and then purpose. I think apart from the vision, I would put it as purpose, the purpose of the organization itself, in terms of which direction that you are looking to go towards, because you have an idea, you have the first set of important core team members that you have on board. But if you don't give them a purpose towards which they want to go towards, because there's always going to be ups and downs in the business, there's going to be growth, there's going to be the bad days also that come around. But only once they have this singular purpose towards that they're actually working towards. And I feel from our sector, where we're working in the sustainability space, days are, there are often bad days that happen, and there's not enough buy-in from a larger audience because they don't think this is the right way to get into. But I think the purpose of the organization, the values that you create within your organization, is what actually helps you grow as an organization and takes you to the right places and attracts the right kind of people also, in terms of making sure that they come towards you. So as compared to the first core group of people is definitely most important, but having that purpose or the vision that the founders actually passionately push out towards the core team, and then they are able to reciprocate that to the team members below them, I think that's where the majority of the work lies. Because at the end of it, as a managerial staff or as a core team member, you're not going to be able to do all the tasks. You're supposed to be able to lead the people with giving them the purpose and giving them the direction towards where they need to be heading towards. But yeah, I think that's my thought on this.
Yeah, I think just to add on, basically, right? I think a lot of these are amazing points, and I couldn't agree more that essentially people are really the heart of every business. But if I had to just add on, I would just basically say that the biggest role I feel as a leader is giving people zero excuses for failure, where I have to create an environment where they can thrive, right? And where every time if something is not successful, it's not because we didn't give the right environment or we didn't give them the right tools, right? It should be genuinely something difficult, and where they're trying their best and they have zero complaints, at least from a environment and from a company standpoint, giving them everything possible to make sure that they are thriving and successful. And more often than not, right, as like many people have said on the call already, if you have the right people, you give them the best environment to kind of go on and attack a problem, it usually results in more often than not, over a long period of time, sustained success, right? Because eventually, being relentless and going after any problem relentlessly, right? You may fail a few times, but you have so many learnings that eventually you will succeed, right? Just having that very strong belief system and being relentless in that way will be very helpful.
Yeah, and we can go on and on and on about this. Anvi, we can't hear you. You'll have to come in to stop us. I'm sure everyone has enough to talk about this. We can't hear you.
I think there's some challenge with her.
We still can't hear you, yeah.
Yeah.
She's logging in again. Well, while the moderator is gone, we can keep our audience engaged still.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am. Extremely sorry for the mess up. The next question, thank you so much for the previous answer. The next question that I have is that what happens is society is usually resilient to change and prefers a monotonous.
Sanvi, we can't hear you. Somehow there is.
Just a second, sir.
So I'll pose the question instead of Sanvi for now. In times like these, unidirectional thinking is considered to be obsolete. Do your respective brands hope to diversify and expand into various sectors? And if yes, how do you plan to do so?
Okay. Ladies first? I go in first, guys?
Yeah, go for it, please.
Okay. I didn't see the name of the person who posed this, but I chanced upon a very interesting theory. It's rooted in physics. I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a science nerd too. It's called the Unfreeze change and refreeze theory, right? Since you guys are all from engineering background, you understand really how do you mold ice, right? It's rooted in the theory of how you have an ice block. And if you have to mold it into a new shape, you have to break it, you have to unfreeze it, and you have to allow that change to happen, and then you have to refreeze it. Anything in this world follows the same pattern. When it comes to consumer behavior, when it comes to consumer mindset, cut to straight business conversations, if you're talking about behavioral change, anything and everything which is kind of forced in a direction where it requires people to come out of their comfort zone and adapt something which is absolutely new, something drastic needs to happen.
Yeah.
Fortunately or unfortunately, we were all kind of posed with the situation. Last 2 years were a pandemic situation. Now, if you look at the example of the pre-pandemic world and the post-pandemic world, for example, you will see drastic consumer behavior changes that have taken place in the last 2 years, right? Sustainability, for example, Rahul, it's on the high rise. People have started understanding the importance of sustainable living, responsible living, right? People have become conscious towards environment. Second is digital. I mean, our lives have gotten taken over by digital solutions. Anything and everything. I think till a few years back, we were buying fruits and vegetables, at least from the roadside, because now even that gets shopped online for, right? So anything and everything which needs to have a behavioral change, that needs to come through something drastic. Yeah. There's a lot of hard work that it involves. It's not easy to change any kind of behavior which is deep rooted in culture. Yeah. And again, if I refer to academia, there's something called Hofstede model. This is actually deeply rooted in geopolitics also. Yeah. India as a cultural, it's basically a hub of activities and cultural backgrounds amounting to God knows what. So if you have to bring about any kind of change in a country like ours, it's a lot of work. It starts at the grassroots level and it goes till the top leadership level. There needs to be alignment at the top tier of the leadership, and there needs to be alignment at the delivery level. That translates into a customer seeing the communication, that translates into the customer understanding what you're implying, what you're trying to do. And that's when the wave of change starts occurring. But it's a very slow process.
Yeah, I think adding to what Pallavi was saying, this is something very interesting that I've deeply noticed in the last like 2 years, but primarily doing work as an educator, is that I've always tried to do things that don't scale, right? Which were very, very difficult to do, because the way that you deepen any kind of impact is, personally, I have always seen that while you build products or services or whatever and whatnot, the first instance should happen as a drastic change, which Pallavi was saying. Like when I started talking to a lot of students of mine on LinkedIn, I consistently mentored them, and it was very hard because you cannot mentor 50 people if you personally are spending like 30 minutes every day or something. But at least what I saw in the initial few set of people, they got jobs. They got jobs in amazing places, right? And then I realized that primarily it is because of the content, the community that you kind of build across, and that community has very strong structure of helping each other, not just unidirectionally, like vertical learning in which Shravan is speaking something and somebody's understanding, but they're learning from their peers, they're learning from their mentors, they're learning from guests that I bring on the YouTube channel that I have, and things around that, right? And it was very unscalable. But what I saw was that this is a model which clearly drives very profound personal outcomes, right? And then I started thinking, what do I do to make it scalable, right? And then this concept that eventually came across, that why don't you do a CBC? How do you build products, which is a cohort-based course in which you can build a larger cohort and make it do in a structured manner. And while I was speaking to these students, and I've spoken to like 10,000 students in the last 18 months, which was very, very taxing, I could better understand that what are the areas that I need to productify or build some features on, which I could have never figured out if I had that conversation just on the outset of things and did things which did not scale or did not spend enough time with it. So I kind of robusted my hypothesis through it and eventually built some kind of a product which is now getting accepted in the market because of certain kind of understanding, certain kind of distribution, certain kind of learning that I had. So doing things that don't scale initially is a very good way to figure out that whether this is truly transformational, and it's the cheapest way to do this. And then once you figure that out and try to build systems on top of that, then that system outlasts. Then that system kind of stays relevant and true. And that is at the heart of any entrepreneur. Like I'm pretty sure that Rahul, when he started, he would have gone and spoken to like hundreds and tons of customers and figured out that what is happening, what is there in the sustainability space, right? And then he started thinking of building a product or building tech on top of it and things like that. I think that is very important. So true transformation, and that is where I saw that education moved from a content layer to a distribution layer. Now it is moving towards a personalized community-led layer, and probably that's also a tool. Maybe going forward it will become something else, right? But you have to consistently reinvent the wheel and do these things that don't scale and learn faster, so that you understand that these feedback loops, which are consistently changing, that you are also cognizant of that, and you consistently make those insertions and change is the only constant for sure. That's the reality of life. Yeah.
No, I think Shravan, I think as a part of an entrepreneur's journey, when you're in the early initial stages of starting off your business or whatever you're doing, I think the initial idea is to, of course, explore absolutely everything. We in our initial stages spoke to multiple scrap dealers, scrap mafias, your old school scrap aggregators, recyclers. And in the initial few years, I think it was very interesting for us to be able to actually, explore the entire spectrum of the sector itself, where unidirectional thinking would probably not work, because sitting in a room and deciding a business plan is something that I don't personally think never works out. You actually have to go down on the ground and figure it out for yourself, talk to the people, and then see where the space is in the market where you can actually create some value as compared to just creating a product for the sake of it. So for me, I think that in the initial stages of your journey of your starting your business, the idea is to fail fast and be able to learn with that. Figure out and explore as many things and as many avenues as you can. And once you've been able to prioritize your space, and this is exactly where you can add value, then I feel focus is what actually should come into the section itself, where you figure out, okay, these are 10 things or these are 20 things that have not worked. There are these 2 things that actually will work or which can scale at the end of it, and then start focusing your energy solely on that. Rather than going wide, you rather go deep into 1 or 2 things that you think that will actually be able to create a large impact. And once you get that into that space, and I think that focus is really important, because what happens as an entrepreneur is that you're always running behind opportunities. as an early entrepreneur, if somebody calls you and says, I'm giving you this business, you run behind it and you forget what you were actually in the business for and run behind that opportunity. So you should have that phase of experimenting and figuring out where you can actually add value. But then post that, you need to be razor focused and figure out, okay, this is where I need to go towards, and be able to add value right over there. And at the same time, of course, not go back into your shell where you don't listen to market feedback. So evolve with the process itself, learn what is happening in your sector, learn what is happening from your customers, from your vendors, from your partners, and evolve your existing service. But focus after the initial experimental stages, I think also as equally important as compared to, unilateral thinking. So focus would be required once you figure out, once you've been able to explore the market as a whole.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think in simple terms, we are talking about non-unidirectional thinking, which can also be simply captured as trying to join the dots. I mean, it's a skill. It's becoming a real skill, guys, that's not taught in schools and colleges. And one needs to start learning the art of how do you see and suss out your landscape, and how do you start connecting the dots and see where does the opportunity really lie. Because competition is no more competition. Competition is changing into co-opetition now. I mean, that's the way commerce will transform. That's the way people will work together and taste success. People have to come together. They have to seek opportunities with each other. Plain old competition is going to die out soon. It has to become a cooperative kind of a strategy. And if one needs to bring about transformation, I feel it has to happen at 3 levels. Unidirectional thinking can never ever facilitate an individual transformation, a very organizational-led transformation, and then there has to be a bigger meaning or larger purpose to it, Rahul said in the beginning. So to bring about any such transformation, which happens in like 3 different layers, you really, really need to be probably just thinking, working less and thinking more.
Yeah, I think just to add on, I would primarily say that at least my philosophy in terms of building companies is it's about intense focus. More and more, most companies basically fail because they spread themselves too thin, and that's where you basically just can't compete, right? Because by definition, a startup is something with very, very limited resources, and there's always a much larger company who is in your space as well. The way you can beat them is basically, being crazily laser focused on an extremely niche problem, building a world-class solution, making, customers who are obsessed around that solution that you basically built, it should be the next best thing to slice bread, for them, essentially, right? Once you're able to do something like that, right, that's when you earn the right to, demand more mind share and wallet share with them, right? And you basically start thinking of peripheral problems which are very natural to the customer journey, right? What comes before in the customer journey, what comes after in the customer journey, and then you basically very systematically kind of think, where do I have a right to, which direction do I have a right to build in, right? As an example, either forward or backward, right? But every time you build something, it should be very, very clear as to why do you deserve to be owning the customer in that particular space, right? And that's why it's critically important, to become a master and become, somebody who creates a world-class solution at a very specific niche problem, rather than, basically going too wide, right? Like the other day I read something very interesting, which is so true, that, every time people ask you this question, right? Like, what if Google builds it? And the answer really is that, in everything that, Google is building, it's not like Sundar Pichai is sitting there and, solving for that particular problem. There's some product manager or some team member of Google who you're actually competing against. And it's very, very unlikely, that he will have the same level of dedication, motivation, and the kind of intellectual horsepower to compete with, your startup whose life kind of depends on solving that one niche problem, right? So, back yourself in competing in very, very niche problems, because most of the time, large companies struggle with, laser focus on specific niche problems.
I think adding to what you're saying is that the fact is that there's this interesting quote by Sam Altman, who was the chairman of YC long back, that it's always good to have few customers who truly love your product than having like zillions of customers who like your product. right?
Yeah.
So it is more like the peripherals of dating. Like you would go on the next date only when you truly like the first experience. So I think I completely agree there. And I think the same synergy, if a lot of people ask me this question, that why did Swiggy venture and start Instamart? Right? Why did they not probably deepen their wallet share in the same segment or things like that? I think the overall synergy is something that you kind of mentioned, that the overall market is that everybody wants to have food every day, right? And you might order 10 times in a month from Swiggy, and that is the max, maybe 12 times or 15 times at max, right? But you need groceries every day, right? You need to make food every day. So the market is probably like 10 versus 30, so it's probably 3x the larger market, and they figured out that that's the most logical bet that they want to enter into the market. And that is something that I was talking to one of the SVPs at Swiggy. So I think that makes all the more logical sense, that when you go deeper into a problem, you kind of figure out what are the parallel nuances or the parallel variables which kind of synergetically just tie together in that larger equation or the larger pattern that you're trying to build. Makes sense. Makes sense.
You know, one of the hottest example I came across a few days back is that PVR has ventured into home vacuum cleaning services.
Oh.
That's phenomenal thinking, and that's non-unidirectional thinking in all possible ways, because they created this infrastructure where they were taking care of sanitization of the theaters, and they had very stringent compliances to do that. Now that things are back to being normal, that infrastructure is ready and available to them to sort of rent out to people who are willing to sanitize and vacuum deep clean their houses and offices. So PVR is obviously thinking laterally and trying to capitalize on spaces where there aren't too many players. It might just go on to becoming a bigger business than theater someday. You never know. So this is how I think thinking out of the box also works in case of businesses where there are resources available, there's a pool available, and you just need to figure where all can you stretch yourself and start seeking the right opportunities and capitalizing on those.
I think what's interesting in both those examples of Swiggy and PVR is that before they got into diversifying their business into other verticals, that they got made really deep dents into the businesses that they initially started off. Because I think that's where they were able to create that customer, they were able to create the market and have the resources, like you said, because as an early stage startup or as a startup entrepreneur, generally resources are limited.
Yeah.
And I think, again, coming back to the focus segment as to being able to focus into one space, getting that thing completely right, and then looking at diversifying, I think in both examples has actually worked out for both, probably will work out for both the organizations at their levels. Apologies, I've got a really bad throat today, so I will try and limit my conversations.
Very insightful. This is very insightful and very enlightening, really. There were a lot of viewpoints and all of them meshed in really, really well. But to take the discussion forward along the same lines, I was wondering how all of you applied different out-of-the-box thinking during the pandemic to combat the changes brought about by the pandemic, and considering how society is resilient to changes like those, how did you deal with the resistance that your audience gave you in taking these ideas forward?
Hi guys, Ravi Ranjan here. Sorry, I was not able to share my thoughts earlier. Is it okay if I go first?
Absolutely, Ravi.
Yes,
please.
yeah.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. So I represent various organizations. I help them with a lot of things. One of the organizations which I represent is called Venture Catalyst. Today, it's a group which has multiple investment vehicles. We have a couple of funds. We invest through those funds. Right at the beginning of pandemic, which is March 2020, we used to host all our pitch days and investment sessions offline in 50 cities in India and 6 countries outside of India. Suddenly, overnight, everything stopped. You cannot travel. People cannot come out. You are not sure what's going to happen next. You are not even sure if your investors would come out and invest, because, think about it. On one side, nobody knows what this virus is capable of. Are we all going to die? Is the world coming to an end? We don't know. And then you're asking your investors, oh, why don't you write me a check of $5 million? So it was really uncertain. But you know what? I'm sure all of you know the last 2 years has been the most amazing year for the startup investment across the world, and India is at #1. So what we did, by April 2nd week, we figured out that we have to launch everything online. Obviously, like all the other organizations, we moved to online, etc., etc. But what we did, very simple change, we tried to make the entire experience so seamless. And also because people had to spend less time, let's say they have to come for a 30-minute call or they have to come for a 60-minute call where they can meet 5 really high quality startups and they can take a call if they want to invest in that. I'm sharing perspective from the startup and investment ecosystem because here, real money is involved. People are writing big checks. And you know what? I'm very happy to share that in the last 2 years, we have raised around $70 million for our fund. And then we have invested more than $55 million. And it has all happened in such a seamless way. And now looking at it, I don't think we want to go back to offline because online works so well, especially for people who are very busy. So if your clientele is high net worth individual and they have very little time, I think if you're able to bring them for a very focused discussion, that works really well. However, comparing the same with a D2C brand or a brand where you have to go and experience that physically, which might be a multiplex or a hotel or a restaurant, this can be very different. But to share the perspective from any business which was digital, I'm sure Pallavi can talk about how Hrx and their digital strategy helped them. But I'm sure for any digital business, it has been phenomenal. That's my take. Thank you so much.
Since you mentioned Ravi, I'll take it forward. Basically, Hrx is partners in a very interesting organization called CureFit. CureFit owns cult gyms. It was a very critical problem that we were all faced with because gym being a studio business it had completely come to a standstill. There was no revenue generation whatsoever. We had to think overnight and strategize about how do we retain these customers because it was a huge cohort and it was a captive customer base hooked to fitness and had nowhere to go. So there was a lot of frustration at the customers level because they had paid up certain subscriptions. You had to deal with that. Plus you had to offer services. I think 2 heroes which emerged for us, Ravi, obviously spoke about how digitization of offerings kind of happened. I think that was a blanket solution for all the businesses. But over and above, what we ended up doing was we started focusing on on-demand content because we realized the OTTs and that's what everybody was doing during pandemic. People were just consuming content. So I think a heavy investment of bandwidth as well as whatever reserves we had went into on-demand content creation, which started taking care of that customer frustration and at least they were receiving something within the confines of home to sort of work with in a very controlled, safe environment. And the second thing which we started focusing on was community building because like Shravan mentioned, a very important new paradigm which is kind of emerging now is community, content, and commerce. Yeah. We kind of cracked the content part. We had to go back and build a very strong community. And I think somewhere we ended up launching many campaigns where we made a lot of interaction happen between the users, the end users, and our followers. We created an Hrx Athlete Program where we started inviting people to become a part of the campaign. So it was crowdsourced kind of campaign creation for brand communication, as well as a very strong community feeling. As an outcome, today we have a very strong community in cycling, physical community because the world has opened up. So we do cycling at Hrx, we do calisthenics, we're beginning that now, we do training, we do running communities, we do under 17 communities, we have a women's community, and they have stuck with us because pandemic was very difficult. That's when we got introduced to each other, we fell in love and we have continued ever since. And also besides these communities, I think our content has become king really, because all these community members have started featuring in our commercials, have started featuring in our content. So in a way, we started kind of proliferating our self-owned influencer army, very loosely held word, but they have become our influencers now. So from customers to influencers was the journey that we kind of used to bridge the gap in our available bandwidth and resources during pandemic.
Yeah, just to add on essentially, right? I think there were 2 broad sets of businesses, right? Essentially, I think one was, maybe offline businesses and the other set was obviously digital businesses, right? For us, we're in the business of, digital lending, right? And we're an infrastructure company primarily, right? That we enable pretty much any company to start doing digital loans in a matter of 48 hours. So for us, the problem was honestly a positive one where overnight, we pretty much had a huge spike up in customers, right? Where pretty much everybody who wanted to kind of get into lending or was doing lending had to convert all of their operations to do digitally, right? So we almost had I would say almost like a 200 to 300% spike in terms of API calls that we were seeing in a matter of like 2 or 3 months itself, right? So that was obviously one part of the equation. But I think so for us, that was a good challenge to have, and obviously you can solve that with good engineering, infrastructure. But I think the other challenge obviously was actually just completely going remote as a team, right? So I think we decided very, very early on in March 2020 itself, even before like the government announced of doing these lockdowns and things like that we wanted to work remotely for the betterment of our staff. And from that perspective, actually, the two things that we primarily did, right, was really kind of push very, very strong levels of communication inside the company and documentation, right? Because if you basically are working remotely, these two things have to happen very, very strongly, right? Like if you communicate consistently, you can do that is actually have a deeper amount of documentation, right? And honestly, it's been a big, big boon, right? Because fundamentally, when you have fantastic level of documentation, coordination, asynchronous coordination, right, becomes so much more better, and it allows team members also to work at their own times, right, without having that necessity or need to always having to be at the same time at the same place, unless of course you're discussing brand new ideas, right? So that's been the biggest change, at least from our side, right? There's been like a lot of effort which has been put into the documentation coordination side of things. But other than that, to be honest, it's for businesses who are building digital companies, completely digital companies, it's just fast tracked where the entire goal was going to be probably 5 years from today into the present, to be very, very honest, to the discomfort of many, but I guess to the certain level of benefit to certain digital companies.
I think adding to what Pallavi on you're also saying is primarily, and Ravi also mentioned, is that for me it was more about testing my hypothesis, right? The way that before the pandemic, what used to happen was I used to be active on LinkedIn and other platforms and read about product management in general, and always used to feel this disconnect that people are talking about a lot of things which are like very jargonish. And most of the times, whenever I used to kind of look at some specific brands who are teaching this, and I'm talking particularly from an education per se, the outcome was not there. So I just wanted to test this hypothesis that, okay, if one of the things that I see that generally people are successful in, and I had mentored like 4 or 5 folks back then, and I saw that most 90% of all success is encouragement, right? So kind of the pandemic happened and I realized that I can do this online, and I started specifically writing on LinkedIn. And what happened, it just opened a pool of access of students who started reaching out to me saying, Shravan, why don't you talk to me and do things like that? And I started testing my hypothesis that if I give time out of genuine compassion and not expect anything in return, will it create a very strong sense of a very close-knit, emotionally distributed community, right? And there only I also learned certain hypotheses, and which was very, very functional because it was so open, so at scale that I saw that product management is typically taught in a very serious manner. Can I do it, make it fun? Can I put humor into it, right? And I started doing that, and that kind of built a very strong sense of people reaching out, talking again, and it laid opportunities on top of opportunities, speaking opportunities at multiple places, at IIMs, multiple other universities, at companies, other places. Then an opportunity came that, okay, from that learning, I realized that most of the people in these colleges are saying that it's really nice, that you're teaching something that's super simple. Then the next opportunity automatically came that, why don't you start a YouTube channel and do things on top of that? And I started that, and it kind of broadened the community even bigger. And post that, then you kind of realize that what is the soul of an educator? And you can do that online and build a very strong online community. And at that point of time, I started that, why don't you do some sort of a passion economy kind of a thing, which I'll always kind of, you think about that you want to follow your passion and become financially independent. And that's where I thought, why don't I do a structured course, and which will be very different from other courses in the market. And I would not do a sales-led model. I would not do any of that. And if there is enough value, people will automatically come, and that happened. So it was more about testing those hypotheses again and again, and figuring out that this is where the strong part of the community learning that actually came to and helped me understand. So the pandemic has kind of propelled my own hypothesis, which I if I had to do that offline, it would have been insanely hard. It would have been like 50 times more the effort. But now that it has fast tracked, and now probably on top of that, I can think of ideas, better education models, which I want to bring across. So I think it has been like something, how do you put it? It's more like serendipity happening and blessing in disguise, probably, at least for me. Yeah.
Wonderful. I have a quick, it's not my input, it's rather a question. So, as I mentioned, I help a lot of large educational groups also. So there are around 350 colleges which I'm advising indirectly. One of the things which I've seen that unfortunately, most of the students, they first initially felt the lockdown and everything was an opportunity to just take a break and just go all out, have fun. But eventually, there were a lot of news of Zoom fatigue, and what I'm trying to say is that students were not able to take advantage of this opportunity. And I have seen memes going across, oh, why offline exams? People are protesting, etc. But that's my question to all the students. Did you take advantage of the lockdown? Businesses did. Companies became billion-dollar businesses. Mansa, a brand became a unicorn in 6 months. There are a couple of companies we invested, they became unicorns in the lockdown. They started in lockdown and they became a $200-300 million company. As a student, did you take advantage of the lockdown? I'm sure you did. If you have not, I think you need to just maybe rethink how do you want to kind of take advantage of some of the time which is still left there in a hybrid mode. So that's a quick thought I wanted to share. Thank you. We can go ahead.
Maybe if I had to add our experience to the pandemic, so pandemic was pretty interesting for us. I thought it gave us a lot of tailwind in the sustainability sector. It definitely to get behavior change. I think Pallavi mentioned it right in the beginning that you need something big to happen to get people to change behaviors. And I think the pandemic just made people realize that sustainability and your personal choices are need to change right now with this pandemic that's coming. We saw a lot of consumer behavior changing on one end. Right from moving to digital modes in terms of purchasing, but also in terms of sustainable practices, right from organic foods to sustainable food products. And at the same end, we saw this trickling down to businesses actually taking up steps towards and setting up their own sustainability goals and working towards that, which gave a lot of tailwind into our sector itself. The biggest change that we actually saw is that because we largely work with a lot of the informal waste collectors across the country, and it was a big challenge to get them onboarded on a digital platform. However, we saw that, with the pandemic coming in and offline transactions completely drying out, and if they had to actually get into the business, they had to move to digital. So that was a great change for us to see that, where our team was already digital, but how do you get the sector to go digital and get formalized? And I think that's been a great tailwind and a great boost in the entire pandemic section that's happened for us.
Yeah, and at a very human level, keeping aside commerce, I mean, Ravi touched upon the student situation, the education system, I'm sure, suffered very deeply and very differently than all the businesses. But at a very human level and at a very leadership sort of a level, I think what everyone got to experience is how to work on their emotional quotients. Rather than just focus on IQ, people learned how to kind of focus on their EQs, because the way the teams were managed, the way communication was handled, the way multiple roles were straddled, the way people had to work within the constraints of managing family, home, and a gazillion other things together at the same time, I think it definitely helped people becoming better leaders by virtue of improved EQ.
Okay, so we're running out of time, so I guess it's about time we wrapped up. I loved the discussion today. It was incredibly enlightening, and you all raised such wonderful points. Be it a community versus an audience, or making use of the pandemic and using it to your advantage. There's so many wonderful points that have been mentioned. I'm incredibly grateful to have witnessed it and been able to moderate it.